Good evening. Hope all of you are well. We are learning Maseches Yevamos daf mem gimel, and we're starting on the top line. We're in the midst of a sugya now that speaks about stam ve'achar kach machlokas. Stam ve'achar kach machlokas. Typically speaking, the halacha is that we follow the stam. That's what we learned on the bottom of the previous page. And if you look just a couple of lines up, it says stam ve'achar kach machlokas mai. We paskin like the machlokas because it's an halacha kisam. Let's see what's going on over here and today, because the Gemara is going to pose a question. On the top of Mem Gimel, the Gemara says, Amar Lev v'hatnan. We have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is in Maseches Kelim, and it says as follows: Misarik shal pishtan. This is a type of comb that was used to comb flax. Shenitlu shinav, and the teeth of the comb were removed. V'nishtayru bo shtaim. All of the teeth were removed except for two. So the din is tmeos. It still has the status of a kli and is therefore tameh. Ve'achas Tehora. Had there only been one, then it would have been Tehora. It would have been a useless kli, and therefore it would have been Tehora. Each one, as each of the teeth of the comb were removed, each one on its own may have had a use, and those would be considered tameh. Now, shel tzemer, if you had a comb that was used for wool, different than the comb that's used for flax, so then the halachos have a slight variation. If one of every other one was removed, so alternating, you removed 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. That was the numbers. Those are the ones you removed. Tahor, that's considered useless as it relates to wool. You need a very fine tooth comb. If you had 3 teeth of the wool comb left in one spot, that's functional, and therefore it would still be considered a kli, and it's tummy. And if one of the ones was an outer one, so then for whatever reason, we're not going to go into the halachos of kelim now, but the Mishnah says that if one of the 3 was an outer one and only 2 of the teeth were inside that outer one, so then the halacha is that it's not a valid kli and it's considered to be tahor. Continuing this Mishnah Maseches Kelim, the Mishnah says nitlu beis v'asan lemalake. Let's say that you take 2 of these teeth and you make them into a malake, aka tweezers. You make these almost like you're eating with chopsticks. You're using them in a way where you're able to pluck hairs out. That's tweezers. So then that's also functional. Tameos, I guess similarly, if you'd make scissors out of them, whatever the kli is, if you make it into a kli, it's going to be tameh. We're not yet done. We're almost there. Achas, if there's one, and v'hiskina l'ner o lemituach, and you use it either to clean out a candle or lemituach, you use it to help stretch a garment out, or when you're weaving, you might want to create a little bit of tension, so you'll stretch the garment and poke one of the teeth in from the comb that you're using. So then the Gemara says, in that case, tameya. And then what do we have? That's a stam. And then v'kaimala de'ein halacha kosa mishnah. And that is, we don't hold like that stam mishnah. So that's a problem for our previous Gemara. So the Gemara says, no, this brisa doesn't pose any problems for us at all. Because Amar Leh, he'll say back to you, that's not correct. Bar mina dehahi. This one brisa happens to be a reject. Why is this brisa rejected? Because the Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish Tamar Tarvav Zoe in the Mishnah. This is an invalid Mishnah. Its authorship is questionable. We do not accept it. Why don't we accept it? My timer. Because the reason why this brisa raises a yellow flag for us is as follows. There's an inherent contradiction between the beginning of this brisa from Kelim, Mishnah and Kelim, and from the end of the Mishnah and Kelim. We're about 15 lines down Mem Gimel Lamed Aleph. What's the problem between the Reish and the Seif and the Mishnah and Kelim? The Gemara says, Diktani, it says in one part of the brisa, Shel Tzemer, when we're talking about the comb that's used for wool, we said Shenitlu shinav achas mi ben time tahor, that if we take alternating teeth out, then the comb is no longer valid. What does that imply? That implies nishtayru bo shtay b'makom echad tameh. That implies that if you have 2 in one place, that it's going to be tameh. But then v'hadar tani nishtayru bo gimel tameh. And that's just opposites, gimel in shtayim lo. So there would be a contradiction on inferences about what the halacha would be with 2. The first part of the Mishnah would seem to say that 2 would be tameh, and the second part says 2 would not be tameh. Says the Gemara, that doesn't mean that the Mishnah is not a valid Mishnah to pose a question from. Of course, it's still valid. In my kushya, what is the difficulty here? I could explain away for you. Maybe when we have 2, the halachos of different are 2. If 2 of them are the outermost bristles, or if 2 of them are the innermost bristles, and therefore the halacha, I can make an easy distinction, says the Gemara. There's no reason to throw out this Gemara. So then the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, it must be mehachad. Really, the challenge of this Mishnah, the reason why Rav and Shmuel, the reason why Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, rejected this Mishnah and said Zoina Mishnah is for another reason, third of the way down. Diktani, the Mishnah says above in Kalim, that if you take one out, if you take them out one at a time, they're tameh. And the Gemara has an implication. Even though you didn't set it into any specific purpose, all you did is you did your thing. You just plucked it out. You didn't know what you were using it for. You just plucked it out. Yet the Mishnah says that it's tameh. And then Ema Seif, a little bit later in the Mishnah in Kalim, what does it say? Only when you take them out to use it as something to clean the candle or as something to stretch out a fabric, that's when it's tameh. What's the implication? Hiskina in lo, hiskina lo. So we see an inherent contradiction in the Reish and the Seifa between the use of a single tooth of the comb. So I'm Rabbi still umay kosha dilma haba bikasaihu below kasaihu. Maybe one has a handle and one doesn't have a handle. When it has a handle, it's a functional clay. When it doesn't have a handle, okay, fine. So we could have answered that way. Amar Papa, I could argue another way. There's another reason why this isn't a real good question. Umay kosha dilma ha bekatinta ha be'alimta. One is very thin and flimsy, and ha be'alimta, one is very thick and strong. So the teeth may just have different qualities to them. So Ella says the Gemara, you're right. This isn't a very good argument, and really this Mishnah should be valid. So if that's true, what about our challenge to our Gemara from yesterday about stam me'achar kach machlokes? To that, the Gemara says halfway down, Ella, you're right. Mishum de mesayme ba davkani zo dibri Reb Shimon. The people who are the davkanim, the people who are exceptional in their understanding of Mishnayos, they said that our Mishnah had an error in it. What's the error in our Mishnah? It should say afterwards, Zo Divi Reb Shimon. And if in fact the Mishnah from Maseches Kalim would say Zo Divi Reb Shimon, what would that then teach us? That would teach us that the Mishnah is not stam, and it therefore doesn't pose a problem to what we were talking about at all. So let's just summarize the first sugya we learned. We thought we had a challenge to our assumptions from yesterday about stam achar kach machlokes, and the Gemara says, no, it's really not a challenge because the brayso you're questioning from was not stam. It was in the name of Reb Shimon. That's a very short summary of the last 30 lines of Gemara. And halfway down, we're going to go back into our sugya about how long a woman has to wait upon the conclusion of a previous marriage. Shalach Reb Chia bar Avin me'arsin toch gimel. One is allowed to get engaged within 3, namely during the 3 months. V'chein osin maisa. That's exactly how they paskin in practical terms. Meaning there was a time in history where we allowed for women to get engaged during the 3-month period of time after they got married, before we hit the 30-day mark to find out if she was hukra ubra. Rabbi Lazar said that in the name of Reb Chanina Gadol, Rubo shel Rishon, Rubo shel Shlish, what you need is most of the first month, most of the 3rd month, and the full 2nd month. So let's just do the math. Let's assume be'erich 16 days in month 1. The full month 2 is 46 days, and another 16 days. You're talking about 62-ish days, 61 days, if you're really being scientific, because we know that the lunar month is 29 point some odd of 0.5 something. So in theory, you could say 15 days. But Lamaisa, let's just say after 62 days or so, she could get engaged. That's what the Gemara says. And Ameimar was more lenient than was more strict than this, but he got called out for it. Ameimar shar le'aris b'yom tishim. He said that on the 90th day, we had been speaking over the last few days in the terminology of after 90 days, that you can get married on day 91. He said you can get engaged on day 90. Now, this Gemara is going to ask a question on Ameimar. It really does apply. The question is also a valid question to the previous Shita, but the person asking the question didn't live when the previous question was asked. What does the Gemara say? Amar le Ravashi le'Ameimar. Ravashi looks at Ameimar and says, hold on one second. That you cannot do it on the 90th day. It's too early. It has to be 91. What do they say? Excluding that day of engagement, you're not allowed to get engaged on day 90 on Meimar. So you can only get engaged on day 91. How can you say that that's the case? Says the Gemara, Hahu, when you see the phrase of chutz miyom shemeisbo v'chutz miyom shenis arsa, that's not talking about a case of tzricha lahamtin gimel, you made an error. Hahu lenyan meinekes itmar, that's talking about a woman who's a meinekes who's nursing. The Rabu Shmuel Damar Tarva tzricha lahamtin kav dalet chodesh, in regards to a meinekes, she has to wait 24 months to get engaged. Chutz miyom shenolad bo v'chutz miyom shenis arsa bo. That's where the qualification of chutz applies, but it doesn't apply to the case that you thought it applied. Therefore, says Ameimar, we can get engaged on day 90. We don't have to wait till day 91. V'hahu, says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. There was a person who followed this rule. He actually tried to get engaged on the 90th day and have a suda. He said, you did it on the wrong day. I'm not allowing this suda to take place. You got engaged a day early. You're breaking out the halachos of the Mishnayos and Yevamos. It's not allowed. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what happened. that wasn't a Sudas Erisin, an engagement party. Rather, Hahi, Sudas Nesuin Havoy. They mamish cheated. They broke all the rules. We're only talking about Erisin in the first 90 days. Everyone agrees you're not supposed to get married during the first 90 days. It was this was talking about Nesuin. So that's how the Gemara deals with all this. How do we paskin halacha l'maisa? The Gemara says as follows: how do we paskin? Here is how we paskin. In regards to a meinekes, tzricha lahamtin kaftal chodesh, she has to wait 24 months. Chutz miyom shenolad bo v'chutz miyom shenis arsa, but we count after the day of birth, and we do not allow marriage to take place on day 90. So it's basically 92 days from birth in theory, I guess as the math goes, not the day of birth, and not the 90th day, but the 91st day. That is how we pass in regards to a meinekes. And the tzricha lahamtin gimel chodashin, and for regular women, they have to wait 3 months. Chutz miyom shemes bo, the chutz miyom shenis arsa bo, the rule of chutz applies to both cases, the case of kaftal chodesh by a meinekes and a case of 3 months by a regular woman. This is also quoted in Shulchan Aruch. That is basically how we paskin, that in the God forbids case scenarios where a person is left, where a woman is left without a husband, she has to wait 3 months until they get engaged. We had said in our Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph that wrapped up to the top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis, we had spoken about a din there. I'll just read it. It says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kol hanoshim yisarsu. All women are allowed to get engaged. Rabbi Yossi was the Mekel in our Mishnah. Chutz min ha'almana, except for a woman who's an almana, mipnei ha'evul, because of her avelus. So let's dig into this sugya a little bit. This will take us until the end of the day. We'll be stopping at the Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Let's jump into this sugya. Amar Rav Chizda, hold on one second. There's a kal v'chomer here. There is one case scenario in halacha, and Rashi tells us what that is, where it's asr lechabes, you're not allowed to do laundry, but you're allowed to get engaged. Take a look at Rashi just to our right. Dibur hamaschel makom. Sorry, that's a little bit. Where's that Rashi? Oh, mutar le'ares. It's b'makom she'asr lechabes. Shabbos shechal tes be'av lios besocha. So Shavua Shechalbo, as we refer to it in our parlance. So the week that Tisha B'Av starts, it's Asr L'Chabes, but Mutar L'Ares, says Rashi, De Erusin Lav Simcha Ninhu. Wow. Okay. It's not a good thing to say to the bride. We're getting engaged, but don't worry, it's not such a simcha. But Lamaisa, it works out that during the Shavua Shechalbo, you're not allowed to do laundry, but you are allowed to get engaged. So the Gemara says, if that's true back in the Gemara, then Makom Shemutar L'Chabes, Eno Din Shemutar L'Ares, then in a scenario where it's permissible for one to do kibbutz, where they're allowed to do laundry, all the more so they should be allowed to get engaged. So what does this mean? So this is talking about our case of the woman in Avelus during Shloshim. During Shloshim, a woman is allowed to do laundry. So if she's allowed to do laundry, says the Gemara, if in a case when you're not allowed to do laundry because of Avelus of Tisha B'Av or the week of Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to get engaged, all the more so here. So how does our Gemara work out? Says the Gemara, Maihi, what are the Mari Makomos that support this idea? That's not 10 lines from the bottom and Gimel Amud Aleph. What does the Mishnah say? Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av B'Socha, Shavua Shechal Bo for Tisha B'Av, Asr L'Saper L'Chabesh, you're not allowed to get haircuts, you're not allowed to do laundry. Uve Chamishi, in preparation for Shabbos, Mutar Ibnei Kavod Shabbos, you're allowed to be Mesaper, you're allowed to be Mechabes. We don't pass in this way. Halacha l'maisa, nobody does that. Nobody does that in the week before. Vitanya, we also have a brisa that says Kodem Hazman Hazeh, in what the Gemara assumes to be the week prior, before Tisha B'Av, so the week before Shavua Shechalbo, Ha'am mimatin be'iskehem, they minimize their work, milisa umilitain, from business transactions, milivnos, from building, vilintoa, and planting, ume arsin, they can get engaged, abalo konsin, but they cannot get fully married, ve'ein osin sudas erusin, they're not allowed to make a sudas erusin. So says the Gemara that we see very clearly from this brisa that you're allowed to get engaged. So says the Gemara, how then can our Mishnah say in the name of Rabbi Yossi that the Alman is not allowed to get engaged? Answers the Gemara, Kitanya, he kodem de kodem. That wasn't talking about the week prior. That was talking about the week before the week prior. So however the math works out, we're talking about not the week of Shavua Shechalbo, but a week and a half before during that full week. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, it doesn't matter. Even if you want to go back 2 weeks, I still have a great kal v'chomer for you. The kodem, even if you want to say that we're talking about 2 weeks before Tisha B'Av, fine. Still, nami kal v'chomer. We see that at a time in the week before the week of Tisha B'Av that one is not allowed to be involved in business transactions, yet they're allowed to get engaged. Then makom shemutar li savalitain, this woman who's an avelus in our Mishnah, for sure, eno din shemutar le'ares. Great questions. The Gemara is really pushing hard against Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, so much so that the Gemara recommends amending our Mishnah to say as follows. You're right. Lo tema de Rabbi Yossi omer kol hanashim yisarsu. If you look back at the language on the bottom of Mem Aleph Amud Beis. I'll quote again. Rabbi Yossi says, "Kol hanashim yisarsu." They're all allowed to get engaged. What's the change that the Gemara is recommending? Lo tema that it's Kol hanashim yisarsu. Ella, last words on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. Ela ema Kol hanashim yinasu, that they're allowed to get married during this time, except for the woman who's in Avelus. So says the Gemara, top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Wait 1 second. What was the chap of waiting 3 months? We spoke about this yesterday. Is lahavchin bein zera lezera. So says the Gemara, v'les le Rabbi Yossi lahavchin. According to the way that you just reworded Rabbi Yossi, he says you can get married during the 3 months if you're not an almana. But what about our concerns about being mavchin bein zera lezera? How can you not be concerned about that? So 2 answers. Leslie. One answer is that he really doesn't hold of this. The Gemara here in the little aleph there says ibai sema lesle. So just a little bit of a different language, more of a clearer answer. Ibai sema laolam islay. Really, he does hold that way. The ema. And what is going on here? That the lashon of our Mishnah is different in the following way. Instead of what we have, it should be Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol arusos grushos yunasu. Any woman who is divorced can get married. So that's already a different ball game, and that language would solve some of our problems. Says the Gemara, Hachi Hainu Rabbi Yehuda. But if you say that, and then you look back in our Mishnah Mem Aleph, you'll see that if we interpret Rabbi Yossi that way over here, that's the same as Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara says, don't worry, Ika beinaihu nisua le'ares. The difference between them is if a woman who was fully married previously is allowed to get engaged during these 3 months. Rabbi Yossi Savar, nisua muteres le'ares. Rabbi Yossi Savar, nisua asur le'ares. So just a machlokas, a subtle machlokas, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara, jumping off on that sugya as a tangent, says the Gemara, wait 1 second. You're trying to suggest that Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that a nisua is asur le'ares. The Savar Rabbi Yossi nisua, that a woman who was married is asur le'ares. She's not allowed to get engaged during shloshim. How can you say during the 3 months? How can you say that? Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol hanashim yisarsu chutz min almana mibnei ha'evul. No one's allowed to get married during that time. So says the Gemara, what kind of question is that? Hi, my kusha. That's not even a question. We can easily change the language of our Mishnah as we did in a previous case to make it match. Maybe our Mishnah here is also talking about a case of grushos, in which case the whole question falls away. Ella, says the Gemara, that the question on Rabbi Yossi really is as follows. Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion, as we saw above on the 6th or 7th line, that Nesua is Asur Le'ares. Says the Gemara, what's the question? It's from the Seifa. What does the Seifa say? Diktani. The Seifa says, V'chulan lo yinasu achu lahen gimel chodashim. In subehu delo ha isruse shapir dami. The diuk from the Mishnah is that you're not allowed to get married, but you are allowed to get engaged. Kasha and Rabbi Yossi. How can you say that an Asua, Arusa, is not allowed to become an Arusa during these 3 months? The Mishnah implies that they are. So Amar Rava, 1/3 of the way down, Gimel Amud Beis, he says, the reason we can get out of this is to say as follows. What is really the language of our Mishnah on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, turning to the top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis? The Gemara says just about halfway down Mem Gimel Amud Beis as follows. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol arusos grushos yinasu chutz min almana b'nei ha'evul. We changed the case to arusos. They were arusos initially, and then they were grushos, and then they were divorced. Then yinasu, they can even get married. Chutz min ha'almana b'nei ha'evul. This solves the problem of lahavchin that we spoke about on the top of the page, and it solves the problem for Rabbi Yossi, where it seemed to imply that an asua could not get engaged. And finishing off the brisa, v'chama evel evil shalah. How long is this avelus? It's shloshim yom. V'nesuas lo yisarsu ad she'elahen shlosha chodashim. That a woman who is married should not engage until she has 3 months cleanly. That period. Then the Gemara asks a side question, one that we've already asked before. So this part of the Gemara will be fast as well. You just said that this case was a woman who was only the Erisin. But if a couple only gets betrothed and then the husband dies, she doesn't have to sit Shiva. Why is the Mishnah saying she's an Avelus? Says the Gemara, if his wife is only married to her, in as much as they're engaged, but not halachically married, so then lo onein, when he dies before burial, there's no aninus, or vice versa, for him to her. He's not allowed to become tamei for her if he's a kohen. She as well. She's not allowed to become tamei for him. There's no aninus. They're not fully married. It's only partial. They're a regular couple, and as much as the ksuba is true, but everything else, they're not a regular couple. So Ella says the Gemara really tanoi. Really, there's a machlokes tanoim going on over here. Rashi, the first of the long lines of Rashi, 10 lines from the bottom. Rashi says Really, the language of our Mishnah is not talking about marriage. Rashi adds in a lot here because we would never have understood this without him. That really we're not talking about marriage, we're talking about yisarsu. We're talking about a case of women who were married and now they are allowed to get engaged. But the difference between the different languages that we presented in the Gemara is a case of Avil. And what did we learn? To Erisin bimei Avel Asr, that to get engaged during the times of Avelus is Asr. Udekashelon, Kodem Azman, Diktani, Umearsen, Tanoihi, the Ikalamanda Asar, Bahi Diktani Mearsen, Lav Dibriakoli, below Spherle, the Rabbi Yossi. So that's just a machlokas in the Tanaim about how to understand the case of Erisin as it relates to Avelus. That's what the Gemara is going to present here. Ela Tanaihi, almost 2/3 of the way down. The Tanya, Rosh Chodesh Ve'adat Tainis, from the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av, Ha'am Matin Meis came Elisa Militem Velivnos Milintom Milaris Mili. So you're not allowed to get married at that time. Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av Besocha Shavuos Shechal Bo Asr LeSapar LeChabes V'Asr LeAres. You're not allowed to get engaged either. V'Yishram Kol HaChodesh Asr, the whole month is going to be Asr. So Maskif Lo Rav Ashi Mimayde LeAres LeAres Mamish. Who says that the Erisin that we're talking about is even a full marriage? Maybe the Erisin is even a real Erisin. Maybe it's only a partial Erisin. Dilma. Maybe it's only the Suda that's Asr during the times of Tisha B'Av, but you'd be allowed to get engaged without a party. Says the Gemara, if what you're saying is that the act of getting engaged is fine as long as there's no Suda, then maybe you can get married without a Suda. Maybe only the wedding party is Asr after Nisuan. But to get married, you're allowed as long as there's no party. Says the Gemara, what are you even comparing? Nothing makes any sense in this comparison. When a person gets fully married, there's simcha. That's not considered a simcha. So therefore, we still have to explain the distinctions between Tisha B'Av, or the halachos surrounding Tisha B'Av in our case, of Avelus in our Mishnah. Amar Rav Ashi, forget the machlokes tanaim. There is no machlokes tanaim. You can't even ask a question in the first place. You tried to ask me a question from the world of the Shavua Shechal Bo and Tisha B'Av. Says the Gemara, hard stop. You're not allowed to make a comparison. Why not? Amar Rav Ashi, shiny Avelus Chadashim Avelus Yishana, v'shiny Avelus Derabim Avelus Yachid. The distinctions between Tisha B'Av and the week of Tisha B'Av and the Avelus of this person are incomparable. There's no comparison between the two of them at all, and therefore you can't even ask your question. So this actually summarizes the whole second half of the Gemara. For the first half of the Gemara, we already spoke about Samach or Kach Machlokes. The rest of the Gemara today was asking the following question. Hey, wait 1 second. How are you saying in our Mishnah about Avelus? What about Tisha B'Av? Says the Gemara in conclusion, you cannot compare what's happening with one person who lost a family member to the world and halachos of Tisha B'Av. No questions to be asked, and our Mishnah can stand on its own 2 feet with the language that we started with. We'll stop right here, and we will pick up tomorrow with the Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Beis with a fresh Mishnah, and wishing you all a beautiful night.